The Legend of Zelda series has featured a wide cast of memorable characters throughout its history. The courageous hero Link, the wise Princess Zelda, and the evil King Ganondorf are the most famous, but many more have shared time in the spotlight over the years. Today, I'll be going over my top 10 characters in the series, and what makes them stand out to me. Before I begin, please note that Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf are banned from this list. They would all be obvious choices with how iconic they are, and I want to give other characters a chance to shine. With that said, alter egos of the Triforce Trio are allowed, and some will even be on this list. And finally, be aware that there will be spoilers for various games on this list. If you see a character from a game you're thinking about playing, you might want to skip their section. With that out of the way, this is FP Productions, and here are my top 10 Legend of Zelda characters. Hilda is one of those alter egos I mentioned. As the Lorulian counterpart to Princess Zelda, she grew up in a world without a Triforce and watched helplessly as her kingdom fell to ruin. In desperation, she sent her servant Yuga to Hyrule to kidnap Zelda and the sages in order to lure Link to Lorule. With the hero and the princess there, she would steal their Triforce pieces in order to restore her own kingdom. Her plan very nearly succeeded, but in the end a certain other character talked her down and she did the right thing. What makes Hilda so unique is that she's the only true twist villain in the series. Sure, there were a couple other games where a villain emerged unexpectedly, like Ganondorf and Twilight Princess, but this is the only time where someone who was portrayed as a good guy ended up being the villain pulling the strings all along. On top of that, she's one of few villains in the series who actually has a clear and sympathetic motivation for their actions. Hilda was put into a desperate situation and did what she had to in order to save her people, even though it meant putting another kingdom through the same thing. What really completes her character is that at the last moment she gives up her desperate attempt and lets Link and Zelda return home, showing that she's not really a bad person deep down. Her story is tragic and really makes you wonder what Zelda would do in the same situation, and thankfully she gets a much-deserved happy ending. Tied into Hilda's story is another Lorulian counterpart, RAVIO. When we first meet him, he's simply a perky shopkeeper who turns your house into a rental shop, but hey, the items he offers are pretty useful. He also throws in a bracelet that lets Link merge onto walls, an invaluable skill that aids him throughout the entire journey. From that point onward, RAVIO mostly acts as a cheerleader, giving you encouraging words anytime you stop by and continuing to offer you items. What elevates RAVIO from a charming shopkeeper to a standout Zelda character is his role in the game's ending. After you've already defeated Yuga in 2 battles at Lorule Castle, Hilda is about to take you on herself in a desperate last stand, but RAVIO intervenes just in time. It's revealed that he's the Lorulian version of Link, which paints his character in a totally different light. He's what Hyrule's hero would be without the signature courage, able only to help from the sidelines instead of taking the threat on himself. One thing he does have in common with his Hyrulean counterpart, however, is his desire for peace. As a longtime friend of Hilda, he finally summons enough courage to talk to her directly and tell her how selfish her plan is. His honesty and kindness are enough to convince her to let Link and Zelda go, showing that RAVIO still has some heroic traits, despite having been cowardly. It really makes you wonder if Link would turn out the same way if he were born in a world with no Triforce. How much of his courage is his own, and how much comes from the aid of the goddess? Whatever the answer, RAVIO is a layered character with a charming personality and a satisfying story arc, earning him a spot on this list. Hailing from a severely underrated game, BYRNE is a name most Zelda fans probably don't even recognize, but to me he's always stood out. BYRNE is a fierce warrior who serves the devilish Chancellor Cole in hopes of becoming his equal, and he poses a threat from the very beginning of the game. His cool demeanor and huge clawed gauntlet make him instantly formidable, and he puts his skill to use by defeating Zelda's guardian, Alfonso. This allows Chancellor Cole to separate Zelda's spirit from her body, kickstarting the events of the game. BYRNE's not just a tough and imposing bad guy though. Later in the game it's revealed that he was once the student of Anjean, guardian of the Tower of Spirits, who he betrayed in his lust for power. This bit of backstory gives him a more personal connection to the characters and overall story, since Anjean is an important ally to Link and Zelda. Later, after a memorable boss battle against BYRNE, the heroes spare his life after Chancellor Cole leaves him to die, and this sparks a transformation in him. Moved by the hero's actions, he ultimately gives his life to buy Zelda time to regain her physical body. This heroic sacrifice makes him one of the only good guys who actually dies in any Zelda game. BYRNE's arc from cold, formidable henchman to noble hero solidifies his place as one of my favorite Zelda characters in the series. Early in Link's second oceanic adventure, he meets a pirate by the name of LINEBECK. Everyone on the island has talked about how glorious and daring the man is, but he turns out to be a selfish coward. However, he's also a hilarious one. His initial interaction with Link is full of genuinely funny gags, and he exudes personality. He tries hard to find excuses for why he hangs back while still seeming cool, and even though he's a jerk, there's just something charming about him. As the journey continues, LINEBECK slowly comes to be more invested in Link's journey. Towards the end of their travels, he hints that he's come to care for Link, and that Link's courage has inspired him. He shows just how inspired he really is in the very last encounter, when he takes the Phantom Sword in hand and stands up to Bellum, trembling from head to toe. This act of courage saves Link and Tetra, but results in LINEBECK getting possessed by Bellum. He goes through a complete character arc without losing any of his charm, and it's a good thing Link is able to free him from the monster's clutches, because losing such a great character would be pretty sad. Outside of the Triforce trio, Impa is probably the most recurring character throughout the series. Her personality and appearance vary, ranging from a kind and portly old woman to a hardened warrior magician, but her role is always the same: to guard the princess and offer wisdom. The role she plays throughout Zelda's history earns her some reputation right off the bat. What really pushes her to the top 10 is her Skyward Sword iteration, where she plays her biggest role yet, at least if we're only looking at mainline games. In addition to aiding Zelda on her quest to enlightenment, she pushes Link to grow as a character. Her interaction with him at the end of the Earth Temple is unforgettable, when, after everything Link goes through to get there, Impa calls him out for being late. When Zelda was in danger, it was Impa who found her just in time, not Link. Link is clearly offended by this, and I remember being mad at Impa when I first got to this part, but her words spur Link to take things more seriously. Later, she gives him respect when he stops GHIRAHIM at the Temple of Time, and from then on regards him as a hero. Through time travel shenanigans, it even turns out that she's the old woman who's helped him at the Sealed Temple throughout the entire adventure. This reveals a more patient and tranquil side of her character, and there's a touching moment at the very end where she says goodbye to the heroes, finally passing on to the next life now that her duty has been fulfilled. This version of Impa is a great character in her own right, and that, combined with her many other appearances, really makes her worthy of the top 10. GHIRAHIM isn't the most complicated character, nor does he undergo some kind of heroic transformation. He's a villain bent on resurrecting his evil master, plain and simple. Despite that, his personality is so strong that he's one of the most memorable Zelda characters. When you first meet him in the Skyview Temple, he presents himself as a dignified lord. but the longer the conversation goes on, the more he exposes a weirder side of himself. With each passing encounter, he becomes not just more brutal, but also more flamboyant. One second he goes toe-to-toe with Impa and threatens to torture Link with the sound of his own screams. In the next, he blathers on about how perfect his form is while striking poses. The contrast between his two sides and the way they somehow feel consistent is fascinating. That's about it for GHIRAHIM. He may not develop like most characters on this list, but his unique personality is enough to carry him. He actually does transform as a character somewhat, but in the opposite direction from normal, if that makes sense. His pride and his devotion to his master cause him to get more and more desperate until finally his lordly facade has completely fallen away, leaving him a more broken character in the end. This sort of downfall works well for a villain and makes GHIRAHIM all the more memorable. The chief of the Gerudo tribe, URBOSA is as tough as a boulder yet gentle as the sand. Her time on screen in Breath of the Wild is short, but her few cutscenes and the legacy she left with the Gerudo show us a lot. She's a fierce warrior who won't hesitate to defend her people, but to her friends she's a kind and wise guide. She's a much needed mother figure for Zelda, to whom she gives encouragement and praise for her efforts, and she also tries to help Link and Zelda warm up to each other. Age of Calamity, though not technically a mainline Zelda game, expands on her character even more. She continues to comfort Zelda in her time of need, gives her successor Riju advice on how to lead, and has several badass moments. URBOSA may be a static character, but she doesn't really need a lot of growth. She's an experienced chief who has a lot of wisdom to offer, and is just a really cool character. Not to spoil the rest of this list, but she's definitely my favorite of the 4 champions. Phantom Hourglass was my first Zelda game, so Tetra was one of the very first characters I was introduced to in the series. However, even though I thought she was pretty cool, it wasn't until I played Wind Waker that I saw how good of a character she really is. Her sass is the first thing that stands out about her, and even though this gives her some charm, she's pretty rude and callous at the beginning of the game. As the captain of a band of pirates, all she really wants is treasure, and she has very little empathy for Link when his sister is kidnapped. However, as the game progresses, Tetra begins to soften. She retains her spunk and sassy personality, but starts to care more about Link and the kidnapped girls. In the game's midpoint, she follows Link to the Forsaken Fortress to rescue the girls, and even goes up against Ganondorf, saving Link's life. Once her character arc is complete, we're left with a badass pirate captain with a spunky flair, and her character development is satisfying to watch unfold. Of course, that's not quite the end of the story. When Tetra discovers her identity as Princess Zelda, her entire demeanor changes. For a pretty big chunk of the game, she seems like an entirely different person, and a generic princess at that. Thankfully, her spunk returns at the final battle, where she joins Link in the fight, and once they return to the surface, she's back to her old self, even with her physical appearance. So in the end, she's definitely still one of the standout characters of the series. Very few Zelda characters undergo as much growth as Midna. When she first meets Link, she uses him as a servant for her own goals and doesn't care at all about what he, or the rest of Hyrule, is going through. She's rude and prideful, and not in a charming way. But as the quest goes on, she gradually loses that prideful edge and treats Link with more respect. Finally, the famous Midna's Lament sequence occurs, and once Link and Zelda work together to save her life, she transforms into a much more likable character. She's able to look beyond her own needs and fights on not just for herself, but all Hyrule. Her relationship with Link from this point on is part of what makes her growth so satisfying. She admits to him that the way she acted before was wrong and asks him if he'll continue on with her instead of trying to force him, and the two become genuine friends. With all that out of the way, the positive aspects of her personality shine through. She's witty, determined, and not at all afraid to show off her power, but now it's being used for a noble cause. In the end, she's even willing to sacrifice herself for Hyrule, though thankfully she survives. Overall, she's a strong character in more ways than one. Before I talk about my favorite supporting character, here are some honorable mentions. Alright, my number one spot goes to... Like Midna, GROOSE starts out very unlikable, though in an almost likable way, if that makes sense. He's a schoolyard bully who sees himself as Link's superior, and doesn't hesitate to say it to his face. He's so jealous of Link's friendship with Zelda that he goes as far as locking Link's loft wing up and not telling him where, which almost gets Link killed, by the way. As if that weren't enough, he even cheats during the wing ceremony, almost stealing Link's well-earned victory. Despite all that though, there's something comical about it all. GROOSE's goofy theme music and extreme antics almost make me like him, and they certainly make him memorable. Once Zelda is sucked beneath the clouds, you won't see GROOSE for a while, unless you go to his room at the Night Academy, where he mopes around, depressed that Zelda is gone and that he lost the wing ceremony. But once you head back down to Faron after clearing the Lanayru mining facility, you're in for a surprise. This scene was not only instantly iconic back in 2011 for its humorous nature, but also marks the beginning of GROOSE's development. He still thinks he's the big hero who will save Zelda, but gradually comes to accept that that's Link's role. After the first encounter with the imprisoned, GROOSE is ready for a rematch, building a portable catapult around the sealed grounds. When the monster shows up for a second and third time, GROOSE joins Link in the fight instead of cowering in the nearby temple. Already, their rivalry has turned into an alliance. Finally, when Link is ready to go meet Zelda at last, GROOSE acknowledges that Link is the hero after all. This moment is accompanied by a shockingly heart-wrenching version of GROOSE's theme that shows how difficult this moment is for him, but he stands aside anyway. And when Zelda finally emerges from the Gate of Time, GROOSE is overjoyed to see her, even though he knows she's going to end up with Link. This shows that he really does care about her as a person, not just because he was into her. And the three of them end up as real friends when all is said and done. In the end, GROOSE evolves from a cocky jerk to a silly but dependable friend, and is by far one of the most memorable characters in the series. Well, that concludes my list of the top 10 Legend of Zelda characters. If you've made it this far, I'll let you in on a little secret. I recently started a Let's Play channel where I'm currently playing through Skyward Sword HD. The link is in the description, and I'd love if you checked out the channel. I'd also love to hear your opinions on this video. Who are your favorite characters and why? In the meantime, this is FP Productions, and I'll see you next time.